I think TSM right now is a very inconsistent team. Like, they can be very good sometimes, and at other times they can lose to bottom tier teams.
Renegades take down TSM.
That game was a mess for TSM.
TSM are a playoff team, and that doesn't look good.
I don't really care about playing against Immortals. I think they are pretty amazing for their record, but not as good as people think.
Very rarely have we seen this type of early lead against Immortals.
They are hesitating a lot to make plays, and then they're making pretty much a lot of mistakes, like random mistakes.
I'm super confident in my ability and my team's ability. Even though our records don't really show it, I think a match would be quite close.
Well, it's not really a big match for us because we already got first seed, but it might be for them because they want to get a seed they really want. But we're just going to beat them.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Week 9 of the North American LCS. We're headed into the last weekend of the regular season, and fans have packed the battle arena to see which teams will be fighting for honor and glory in the upcoming postseason. You saw there a slew of Renegades fans, but all of the fans are pumped up and bringing their hype for their favorite teams today. First up, it's Team Impulse, who you see here, talking a little bit of strategy before they face off against Renegades, who are looking to make a late season climb out of last place. We'll see if they can do that with our first game today. Thank you very much for watching with us. I'm James Dash Patterson, and we have Isaac Azael Cummings-Bentley from the Playtest team to help us break down the new patch, along with regulars Joshua Jat-Leesman and Aiden Zyrene Moon.
I'm not sure if being called a regular is a compliment or an insult.
I'm not really sure either.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like, do you want to just be a regular on a show? Yes, but a regular human being.
Internet TV show, I think, is pretty close.
There you go.
Shouldn't ask questions if you don't know the answer.
So Zyrene will take it as a compliment. Jat's still living in this nebulous space of whether or not we're on good terms. Anyway, before we jump into our discussions, let's take a look at the standings and see where all the teams are positioned. In first place, it's Immortals with Cloud9 and CLG tied for second place. Then we have TSM in fourth with Energy Esports and Liquid tied in fifth to round out the current playoff picture. Echo Fox is hot on their heels, though, in seventh place and is followed by Team Impulse in eighth, Team Dignitas in ninth, and Renegades in 10th. Now, the top four teams have already secured their playoff berths, but there is still a lot on the line for the rest of the league coming into this weekend. A first-round playoff bye is still on the table, with Counterlogic Gaming and Cloud9 tied for second place behind Immortals. So let's start there.
I think CLG, they have a game that they could lose against Energy, since Energy had that fantastic game with Moon last week, and they're coming off of a 1-1 CLGR. And they actually played Yasuo top, and it was something where they're trying to find a new split pusher. And that's what concerns me about CLG coming into playoffs, is this is a team that every time they've come to playoffs, except for last year, they've overthought their strategy and tried to swap to something else.
Yeah, and they did have a rough tournament when they went to Poland for IM Katowice. As soon as they came back, they lost a game to Team Liquid. I think that had a little bit to do with just not having that much practice on the current patch. We mentioned they're like, oh yeah, we think Yasuo beats Nautilus in lane. We didn't even think about the rest of the game, and they played that in LCS.
Yeah.
Like, they just picked it in an LCS game, so that was a mistake. I think COG's best action forward is if they just continue to do what they've been doing, but if the meta shifts too far, then it's going to really bite them.
Now, on the other side of things, for that playoff picture, Cloud9 also vying for the first round bye. They've got Team Liquid and Echo Fox left to play this weekend. Thoughts there?
Yeah, it should be pretty interesting. I mean, I think Team Liquid, they're always these guys that are so confident about themselves, right? And this is like one last chance, finally prove you guys do compete with the very best teams going in. And C9 is going to be in tough.
Yeah, C9, Jensen walking away with MVP last week for good reason. He's been playing this Varus, and he's been dominating on it. And once again, he's looking like he's in the running for MVP of the entire split because he has stepped up on this squad. They came back last week from deficits, I believe, in both of their games for a 2-0 victory.
Well, if all things go to chalk, both of these teams should win both of their games this weekend, which would make for a pretty sweet tiebreaker there for that first round bye. So fingers crossed if you want to see more League of Legends. Now, we've been tracking the progress of Echo Fox and their fight for a playoff spot, but after last week's results, they could be forced out before they even play today.
Yeah, it's going to be really dependent on how the other teams do, but Echo Fox can't lose sight of their ultimate goal. They knew the spring split was going to be a practice split, and they really expected to hit their stride in summer. even if they get eliminated from the playoff picture, they still control their own destiny in regards to the 7th seed and safety, and therefore qualification for the summer split. And I think really that's what they should be going for.
Yeah, no doubt Cloud9 will be a tough opponent, but as you mentioned, they're in control of their own fates here, rebuilding season, considering the fact that they didn't have their full roster the entire split. If they can end up in 7th, that's probably something they would be happy with, without a doubt. Now, of course, let's move on to Renegades, who aren't going to be able to make it to the playoffs, but they're creating quite a stir on the bottom part of the bracket in that 8th, 9th, 10th race.
Yeah, I've got to say, they look a lot better with this new roster. I think there's always that kind of honeymoon stage when you get a new swap in there. Seraph has been looking great in the top lane, and this will be something to build some momentum towards that, keeping their spot.
Yeah, and I love this about Renegades because Seraph is basically a secondary shot caller for Crumbs, takes a little bit off his shoulders. He's also another threat, so that helps Freeze out, and so does Ninja. Ninja can play a supportive role as well as an assassination engager. So this squad looks like it's really rounded out, and Seraph thinks they're top 2, possibly, but
confident man. He's a confident fellow.
They can still get 8th place and the highest seed that they can coming into promotion, and that's what they're gunning for right now.
I mean, that's the attitude you want of the players on a new roster, right? If you're looking to make changes and make improvements, you want people thinking that you can shoot for the stars. Now, teams, of course, this week will be playing on patch 6.5, so let's explore some of the changes that might be hitting competitive play today. I want to start with changes to champions that we have already seen. So Soraka and Nautilus.
Yeah, Soraka got some changes to the heal. It's not as effective in the Q. Got shifted around in terms of power. It slows basically in the entire area, and it gives her a heal over time that then amplifies her heal. So she's more kind of, you have to actually land the Q in the middle of combat, and that's how part of her pattern now. I've seen some people max Q, not sold on it completely just yet, but Adrian has been playing it, Conquan has been playing it. Maybe we'll see it this week because it's immediately enabled.
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see how it does shake out, because with the changes, it's a lot more emphasis on your Q. It's higher risk, higher reward kind of thing. You can't just sit in the back, use your Ws. Without hitting the Q first, your W is extremely ineffective. But if you are able to consistently hit those Qs, it's really big.
Yeah, I'm curious as well to see how Nautilus plays out, because his nerfs were somewhat small, yet still very important. I think on the previous patch, there was a lot of top lane tank trading you could do with Poppy and Nautilus, or you could just combo them both on your team. But now I feel like Poppy is kind of S tier, and then Nautilus is knocked below into the world with Trundle. And that will either make Poppy a permaban or a very early pick, and it definitely knocks Nautilus down where you don't even need to pick him every game, I don't think. With the
international play has been an example of that already this past week. Now let's move into the jungle and some champions that we haven't seen but could possibly with the changes that they received. J4, Sejuani specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see some Assassin J4, some DPS J4, because it's the big play potential with Cataclysm, right? If you can catch a couple carries in the Cataclysm, it does damage to everyone who's in that circle now. You could potentially end the game. That'd be pretty sick.
Yeah, I mean, I think because of the shield cooling on the W, he has a much safer jungle clear, but I still feel like he wouldn't be a fast enough jungler to compete with Nidalee, or if Nidalee's banned, even Kindred. But if we do see him, I think we would probably see him in the mid lane against an Azir matchup, because Azir is coming back as well. I think the burst potential from Jarvan combined with any damage can just kill Azir, and Azir is a champion who doesn't like building Zhonya's Hourglass either, which is traditionally why Zed's pretty good against him. So I think Jarvan can fit a similar mold.
Yeah, instead of jumping onto Sejuani immediately, I want to jump on that Azir really quickly, because he is like 80% prevalence right now. He saw 13 picks on 6.5 internationally so far. So Azir in the mid lane is now the premier late game, mid game wave clear type champion, and everybody's going back to him, even though there's only bug fixes really. There weren't any big buffs to him.
On this patch, he is the second most pick banned mid laner to Corki, which is,
well, there you have it.
I mean, little usability.
Well, if you're telling me that's the case study or the scenario that needs to present itself for a Jarvan mid lane game, then I'm all for it. I would love to see that brought out. Now, Zyrene, bring me in on the Sejuani and what happened there.
Sejuani basically got the W feels a lot better. It's not as clunky, and then the permafrost, the E, which is sometimes maxed second or last, has a higher base damage on the first rank of it. So you don't have to really invest in it too much. Helps her early clear, helps her early game, so she has a little bit more damage for that trading against junglers. So I honestly think that she's a pretty good jungler right now. We may see her, and I want to see engages come out, because there's so many compositions like Cloud9 are playing with Trundle for disengage, with Varus. So having a Sejuani on your team would be very beneficial.
Yeah, and we're short on memes, so when Xmithy plays Sejuani again, like as soon as something goes wrong, we have a new one.
Are we short on, when we're short on memes, you rely on Jat to come up with something.
Of course.
The body never is it intentional.
It truly is the darkest timeline.
If you're looking for memes, you do not get them.
Of course, all of this jungle talk is if Nidalee's not on the table, right? Because she is by far and away still the largely prioritized jungle. Well, before we get into game, and with the stakes fresh in our minds, let's remind everyone what the spring split is all about. championship points. Now remember, playoff teams earn points at 90, 70, 50, 30, and 10 and 10 for finishing in somewhere in the playoffs. But of course, the distribution of these champion points are the same as last season. The road to getting them is a little different. After the quarterfinal rounds, dynamic seeding will be in effect, which guarantees that Immortals will play the lowest remaining seed, regardless of how the previous rounds play out. So again, that just puts emphasis on finishing as high as you possibly can in the regular season so as to avoid facing that top seed.
Yeah, similar system actually. The NFL uses exactly the same dynamic seeding in a 16 playoff. So I think it works pretty well. I'm looking forward to seeing it in the LCS.
All right, well, there we have it. There's still 2 days of play left for teams to shake up the standings. So let's see what we have in store today. First up, Team Impulse will be taking on Renegades, followed by Counter Logic Gaming and Energy Esports. Later in the day, Team Dignitas is up against Liquid, and Cloud9 will face off against Echo Fox in our last game of the day. But make sure you're around for Game 3 and our match of the week when Immortals go head-to-head with TSM. Now, both these teams already secured playoff positioning, but have a lot to prove. Immortals, we've talked about them, some minor mistakes and cracks showing in the armor, and for TSM, it's just been a roller coaster of a season.
Yeah, I think TSM is much more on kind of a bit of a downtrend. Immortals were nitpicking, but I mean, they're like 15-1, right?
Yeah,
like they're doing pretty well.
That's awful.
Why are we so hard on a 15-1 team? It's like,
They didn't win in 25 minutes.
What are they doing?
98% on a test. It's like, no.
Right.
I do think this is an interesting game only because Immortals has a real chance to show off and really kind of ruin TSM's day / week. Because if they beat TSM and TSM has an 0-2 week, they can drop all the way as low as 6th seed.
Right.
Whereas Immortals also have a chance to play a lot of the new champions. Like we were talking about new Soraka, Hecarim was buffed in the last patch. If we're going to see a mid lane Jarvan, I think all of those things could potentially happen from Immortals side against
Get
TSM.
that Urgot in there.
I would love
Fear on
to.
Swap.
But when I think about Immortals in the way that they like to play, so they're going to hide some things for playoffs, right? Don't show your hand, don't give too much away. But Immortals are always playing to win, even when they're playing lower teams. They talk about how they don't play to level their opponent. They want to play their game. So if Immortals can put their money where their mouth is, this is going to be a game where they try as hard as they can without trying to give up strategies later on.
All right, well, there you have it. We've talked about the teams, but we want you to talk about the players. For our social media question of the day, we want to know which player will have the most impact going into playoffs and why. Tweet your thoughts to @LOL Esports, and we'll check back with some of your responses later in the show. That's going to do it for us here on the desk, so let's check in with the casters to get us into Game 1.